too structured today, just sharing some blurbs about expanding Starknet to Bitcoin. Just some lessons we've learned as someone who works in a roll-up over Ethereum that wants to start attracting attention of Bitcoiners. This is just a bunch of personal opinions, which is basically another way of saying you can leave this room if you want facts. No facts, just opinions. Okay, so what are we trying to do? I'll say a bit more about Starknet in a minute, but in a nutshell, we're a roll-up over Ethereum, and we want to start connecting the Ethereum and Bitcoin ecosystems. And now that we want to take the first steps towards the Bitcoin ecosystem, we sort of need to figure out what do we say and to who do we say it. And it turns out it's pretty different from the Ethereum ecosystems. The standards, the expectations, the language, they're not the same, even though you might be saying that you might think the problems we're trying to solve are pretty similar. We want to scale a blockchain, give it more use cases. So these are the typical impressive exponential graphs you see for performance. You see the Bitcoin TPS, it's equal exactly to 0. Nothing happens on Bitcoin. And then you see, in this case, Starknet, but you can replace it with a generic rollup. You see that the performance improves over time. If you show this graph to someone from the Ethereum ecosystem, they say, oh, amazing, the L1 can do 1 TPS, your L2 can do 1,000,000 TPS, this is good, how can we work together? This doesn't work for Bitcoin. This is lesson number 1. It doesn't work. Lesson number 2, you say, holy shit, a Bitcoin transaction costs $1 million. A Starknet transaction costs 1/100 of a cent. And then you expect people on Ethereum to say, oh, this is good, let's work together. No, Bitcoiners say, I don't care. So lesson number 2, this also doesn't work. So the point of performance and costs is not enough to convince any Bitcoiner of anything, and it's sometimes not even enough to attract their attention. Okay, so what's the target audience that we're sort of aiming for? So because I do product and not marketing, I'm mostly oriented towards the people that are sort of part of Bitcoin core, the people who have opinions about the Bitcoin core protocol, not people who just say fluffy words. And this is sort of the people I need to find a common language with. Okay, so just to briefly review the values that I think are sort of, they're not unique to the Bitcoin ecosystem, but I think they are somewhat different from how you'd perceive them in Ethereum. So sovereignty, obviously, people need to own their shit. For Ethereum, this is a bit weaker than for Bitcoin because Ethereans generally consider assets that they own on an L2 still theirs. And if you tell them stories about escape hatches, they will generally stop listening and just nod their head in agreement and move on to try and make money. For Bitcoin, it's not the same. If Bitcoiners try to move if you try to convince them to move their Bitcoin, they walk out of the room and they will probably tell to their friends that you're a bad person. So sovereignty, its meaning in the Bitcoin ecosystem is much stronger than in Ethereum. I think the same goes for decentralization. Ethereum, it's a major point in the Ethereum ethos, but it's not really what Bitcoiners perceive. The existence of people like Vitalik is not optimal for Bitcoiners. The fact that you can have one person who can sway the evolution of the protocol is not ideal. So Bitcoiners, they like the fact that you have rules without rulers, and this isn't really something we can say for the Ethereum ecosystem, and it's pretty different. I'll get back to this point a bit later on. Digital gold, obviously, that's not something that Ethereans, most of them try to double down on. In fact, they try to do the opposite. And for Bitcoiners, this is a huge selling point. You have a super defined product, and you're not trying to deviate from it too much. I'll skip transparency, but stability is also a thing. If you go to a random builder in the Ethereum ecosystem and you start trying to brain fuck them with DAGs and like low latency real-time proving, it makes them smile and they say, "Oh, this is great. We'll have a bunch of protocol changes. We will solve all the problems in the world." Bitcoiners don't react that way. They like stability. They have lots of inertia to any protocol change, and they really require justification, which is surprisingly difficult to give. I mean, sometimes you expect that you'll say some buzzwords and everyone will be convinced, like world peace, but they don't want world peace. I'm not sure what they want, but it's not world peace. What? It works? War is pretty good, okay. Okay, just my perception of Bitcoiner perceptions of Ethereum. It's a bit centralized around Vitalik and company. It's a bit too influenced by VCs because the whole roll-up ecosystem is it has a large VC presence. People are bothered by the fact that monetary policy is not set in stone. So even if you know the ins and outs of EIP 1559, it's not something that Bitcoiners know. And as far as they know, there is no capped supply and no fixed inflation record. So it's basically a big question mark. Many of them consider POS as inferior to proof of work. And some of them feel that there is too much that's trying to be done. It's just shooting in all directions at once. I think this is how some Ethereans perceive Bitcoin. They think it's just a digital pet rock. They don't understand where is the general computation. They think many Bitcoiners are narrow-minded and old-fashioned, and they think the network is too slow to be useful. Obviously, very, very big gaps in perception. This is just a slide it doesn't really fit linearly into my presentation, but I like the picture, so I will now discuss this picture. Many people think of Bitcoin as a small bubble in crypto, and it's disjoint from fiat, but I think the reality for normies, for people who don't obsessively consume crypto Twitter, is that there is a thing called Bitcoin, and there is some stuff called crypto, which is a cool way to invest your money, which is, yeah, it's different than how we sort of think of crypto. And when you talk to people who are rich, and you try to convince them to do things in crypto, this is what they have in mind. They have in mind the right part of the slide. They're not really convinced of the left part. Okay, back to a somewhat linear presentation. So we mentioned two visions, two tribes. I want to say a few more words about scaling in a second, but in a nutshell, Bitcoiners, they're conflicted on scaling. Even those of them who understand there's a problem that may be interesting to solve, there is no agreement on the definition of the problem space, on the assumptions that you need to take. I'll say more about this in a second. And as we mentioned, no rulers, only rules. In Ethereum, I think it's drastically different in the sense that we all think it's good to have a world computer. We think it's good to let people compute whatever the hell they want. And we like the fact that it's undefined and people can build whatever they want. Bitcoiners, they actually explicitly, some of them don't like this. They don't like having a change that extends functionality but can have unforeseen consequences. So this is, in my opinion, also a very drastic deviation from what I was used to. This is just two sets of challenges, how I perceive them. I may be completely demented, so you can ignore me, but this is just my take. Bitcoin, I think one of the biggest challenges is how do you unlock $2 trillion of gold under people's mattresses? How do you do it? Can you do it in a useful way? And how do you convince people? And then, to me, they're second order because they're less productish, but there's the question of the security budget. So what happens once the inflation diminishes? If the network has low throughput, then transaction fees are a relatively small flux of money, and it's not clear how they're enough to actually incentivize people to mine without extra activity. And there's the buzzword of quantum resistance, which I'll skip. In Ethereum, I think it's pretty different. So Ethereum, the way I understand, would like to dominate the Web3, Web2 interface. It would like to be sort of the portal for everything related to crypto. And beyond that, there's some technical challenges of protocol improvements and then competition and drama. But on one hand, you have an ecosystem that's convinced of the utility and just wants to implement it as well as possible. And on the other, you have, I guess, the first steps of these discussions with much more inertia. Okay, so just some concrete bullet lessons I learned. The first I mentioned, one does not simply add opcodes. So I assume people here don't spend their free time thinking on how to have general computation on Bitcoin. So just 30 seconds of folklore knowledge. There's one opcode called opcat, and if you add it to Bitcoin, it just allows you to concatenate elements in the stack. So it's like as primitive as you'd expect. It turns out that if you're really sick in the head, you can take this thing and you can use it to have pretty much general computation on Bitcoin. And if you go and tell a Bitcoiner, hey, let's just add opcat, shouldn't we just add it and then people will be happy? They will be personally offended on like a spiritual level. So they have, good luck. The need for scaling is not obvious. Not all people agree that you need to scale it. As I said, some people are satisfied with digital gold and they don't want anything beyond that. So that in itself is an argument that Ethereans generally don't need to hold. The third one is, I think, the most interesting for me as someone who is a pseudo-technical product manager. The scaling solution is a much broader space than in Ethereum. In Ethereum, you have this thing called proofs. It's a nice primitive, and then everyone agrees that rollups are a good architecture to scale. But in Bitcoin, it's completely different. For example, the leading scaling solution on Bitcoin, which is called the Lightning Network, has completely different trade-offs than rollups. They're fine with assuming that all of their users are live, that they're active, and it's a completely different paradigm than rollups, where you don't want to assume the users are live and constantly monitoring the system. Same for a bunch of other perverted constructions. One of them that I don't recommend you read, but maybe you should still, is called BitVM, which is it's like an optimistic execution framework for Bitcoin. So the bottom line isn't the technicals, it's just that we're really used to thinking of rollups as the canonical way to scale blockchains, but Bitcoiners don't, and many of them don't understand what rollups are. Some of them don't understand what proofs are or how they work. And if you happen to decide that you want to have this conversation, don't assume that rollups are the way to go. And yeah, this is, I think, pretty clear. Bitcoiners don't like corporate crap. They're not really exposed to it as much as we are in the Ethereum ecosystem. They don't have 10 wallet companies for, I don't know, any decentralized potato. They don't have games yet. So they want to be really clear. They want the technology to be clear. They don't want people to, how do you say it, sweep security questions under the rug. They don't want jargon. They just want a description of the thing. Okay, and this is the most important slide, I think. Not this one. It's this one. I have nothing more to say. That's it.
So, what's the latest with the OPCAT? I thought I saw some good news about it, but maybe not.
No good news. Bad news. Very bad news. No OPCAT for 1 to 2 years, we think. So the playing field, as I understand it, is something like this. You have the thing that people want most in Bitcoin, which is some scaling solution with a limited scope and no protocol changes. It's important that there's no protocol changes. So that's the most conservative. On the other extreme, you have people that are for OPCAT because it unlocks general computation. But at least for now, most core Bitcoiners, people that have a reputation on crypto Twitter, for them this is a no-go, complete no-go, for various reasons, by the way. Some of them are just conservative by ideology, and some of them are concerned about concrete things. And then in the middle, you have very narrow scope opcodes that will allow you to optimize the efficiency of things like BitVM, but without opening Pandora's box.
And what about other rollups that like Stacks comes to mind? And are these not rollups as well, or rollups as we understand them?
So Starks are just a proof system, and in order to use proof systems on Bitcoin natively, you would need to be able to verify proofs natively on Bitcoin, but you can't because the computation you need to verify a Stark or even a Snark.
No, but I meant Stacks, like STACK.
It's a specific project?
Yeah.
Okay, so disclaimer, I hope I don't hurt anyone's feelings, but I probably will.
I'm not there.
Okay, so. This is good information. Okay, there are no rollups over Bitcoin. Anyone who says there is a rollup over Bitcoin right now is lying, but there are convenient approximations to the truth. So a bunch of people, they sequence things, they have their own blockchain, and then they just post some data on Bitcoin. In that sense, Bitcoin helps sequence this data, but it doesn't verify the correctness of the execution. So in that sense, it's not a rollup, but
it's more of a DA kind of thing. Like
it's a marketing rollup.
So I have a kind of a product question. So what is the end goal of having a Bitcoin layer 2. So yes, there are Bitcoin maxis that can object to these things, but realistically, more and more of the Bitcoin is being held by, ETFs, people who hold it on centralized exchanges, and da da da. So I don't know what the kind of split is, but realistically, a lot of the Bitcoin is held by people that maybe don't have these concerns. And so I guess the end goal of having a layer 2 on a Bitcoin is so that we can use Bitcoin to have utility. Like maybe, we have kind of the way we now have ETH used in borrowing and lending and staking for, backing stablecoins and all this stuff. We can do the same thing with Bitcoin. But in theory, we could do that now with derivatives. This is the kind of the anathema. The derivatives of Bitcoin, like RABBTC, Coinbase BTC, Lombard BTC, and all this stuff. But they're not really taking off that much. Like there is a few billion TVL. So is the thing that's blocking Bitcoin becoming an asset for DeFi and having utility the fact that people really dislike derivatives of it on Ethereum, or is there some bigger sort of reason that wouldn't be unlocked by a layer 2 on Bitcoin?
Okay, I have the best answer. Can you guess my answer?
We'll find out. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I can give you a small take. First of all, just an interesting factoid. Only about 30 billion of Bitcoin is bridged or wrapped at all. So the vast majority is just static. It maybe moves around in centralized exchanges, but it doesn't really move to different places. The conclusions I can draw from this are two, and they're pretty much contradictory. One is that people, they want security before they move their Bitcoin, and the other is that most of the activity is happening on centralized exchanges, and people don't care and they don't want security. We need to explore both directions, but I think it'll probably be in one of the avenues you mentioned. Either people need a more convenient and secure way to have like BTC Fi on-chain, or it doesn't matter at all, and it's just the generic question of crypto adoption, which is the open question of, okay, you have blockchains, cool, what now? Hopefully it will be the first. I think it will be the first, and we're looking into it, but I don't think it's established enough to sort of lay it down as the law of the land.
Just a small add-on. Opcat was active in Bitcoin for the first 2 years, and it was removed by Satoshi himself, so that's why people are hesitating to reactivate it.
I think I agree. I think they're hesitant because the original concerns were I think more amorphous. It was about some vague thing called spam, but now it's much more concrete. They're worried that block space will be taken away for bad things, and bad things is now less vague than before. They don't want VCs buying out large percentages of blocks. They're not sure what these things will do to their gold. So I think it's a bit more distilled now.
So, slight question on the alt. Yep, here on alt BTC chains, because Bitcoin is going to be complicated. Have you thought about deploying to other BTC chains? And for the meme, I'm thinking about Dogecoin, because there is a huge community with users who are, actually eager for use case. They'd be thrilled about an upgrade called Opcat. So yeah, what do you think about that?
I think it's a great idea, and we're working on it. So Doge is really great because they're flexible towards protocol changes, and it can be a great place to test what would have happened if. The problem is that it's a bit of a different target audience. You're going toward people who are much more flexible. At the end of the day, you won't be having the same conversation with a Dogecoiner. The conversation with them will be different than the one you'll be having with some family office who is telling a bunch of rich people that it's okay to put their 100 million into BTC. So technically it's a great idea and we will pursue it, but the conclusions you can infer from one to the other, I think, are pretty limited.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.